They came for me after a couple weeks. I mean, they really, honestly, physically came for me. Apparently, J. Carter Thompson wasn't going to stand for the threat of public censure or imprisonment, because late that night he sent two men after me. And I was still getting used to the routine of independent living. For example, the layout and routines of my new apartment took some getting used to. Tonight, before I went to bed, I remembered the trash. The kitchen trash can was almost full, and I needed to take it to the dumpster before morning, and for two reasons. First, it was already starting to smell. Second, the car was coming early in the morning, and I wanted to take advantage of that. Added to that was the fact that I was still coming to grips with everything that had happened over the past few months in my home and work situation. I was just lowering the lid of the container outside, dumping my bag of trash in there, when I saw them. I don't know why I freaked out, but I did. These two men didn't belong here. This apartment complex had weekly community meetings every Saturday night, and I had already been to the last two and met the other tenants. These guys were definitely not tenants. Unfortunately, they saw me turn away from the dumpster. Apparently, they didn't recognize me in the dim light, or they were just targeting the place because one of them asked me in a friendly way, "Hey buddy, which one of these places is 106 D's apartment in?" My apartment. Although these apartments were a level above the ones I had lived in before, they were not clearly labeled as either apartments or parking spaces for residents. So the confusion with these two confirmed that they didn't belong here. "Oh," I muttered. "It's on the other side and down the far stairs." I barely managed to utter the phrase without a squeak in my voice. Once again, I realized that they were asking about my apartment, meaning me. What did these two rough-looking guys want with me? And why were they wearing windbreakers on a warm Georgia summer evening? The only answer I could come up with nearly made me pee in my shorts as my brain began to piece the facts together. These guys were armed. Armed and looking for my apartment. Armed and looking for my apartment with me in it. Armed and looking for my apartment with me in it to hurt me or kill me. And they were brazen enough to ask corroborating questions of some guy by the dumpster without worrying about what he might later witness. So I waited until they started retreating to the far corner of the building in search of a far staircase that wasn't really there. I wasn't so much standing still to fool them as I was afraid to move. Luckily, I had my wallet, phone, and keys with me as I left the apartment. The fact that I accidentally locked my apartment the first week I was there became a hard and expensive lesson for me when the apartment complex manager charged me $50 for a lockpick. It also taught me to keep a cell phone handy, because that incident showed me how difficult it was to get another apartment resident to open the door after dark so I could use the phone to call for help. I knew I had to get to my car and call for help, but who? The only person I could count on was John London, my lawyer. When I finally made my way to my car, I hit the speed dial button. "Hello?" I heard, closing the car door and fumbling for my keys to get out of there. "John, it's Lou," I began as the voice on the other end continued. It was the dreaded, "You've reached the number for John London. Please leave a message." Shit. I started the car just as the two thugs realized that the guy at the dumpster had lied to them, which meant he was probably their target. And now they were running in my direction when I finally put the car in drive. I saw one of them raise his hand, and immediately I saw a flash. A star pattern appeared on the windshield on the passenger side and began to spread rapidly. Those bastards were shooting. At me. I pulled out of the parking lot, but I had to stop in front of an automatic barrier before I could pull into the street. I heard a few more bangs on the back of the car and saw in the rearview mirror two more star patterns appearing on the rear windshield. Finally pulling into the street, I almost dropped my phone in the gap between the driver's seat and the center console. I couldn't reach for it and look outside at the same time, so I just drove on. I could get the phone later. And I had gone about 3 blocks when the car stalled right in the middle of the street. Apparently, these guys got lucky with the scope, even in the semi-darkness. I knew I couldn't get this beast started again, and I didn't have time to get my phone out from under the seat. These guys would probably catch up with me before I could do that. So I quickly got out of the car, walked around it, and ran over the curb into the small woods that stood between two apartment complexes as a landscape barrier. As I crossed the sidewalk and headed toward the peripheral bushes planted along the edge of the wooded area, I heard the engine noise of another car approaching from the direction of my apartment complex. It had to be them. I moved as far into the wooded area as I could and ran into a fence. I was in a real trap if these two thugs saw my car and came looking. As I began to be rocked back and forth, I raised both hands to my face in terror. And then I saw on my left wrist. Was I so desperate that I was willing to rely on superstition, even one that had already worked once? Could it work again? How many charges are in this thing? 50 or 60 meters away from me, I heard the slamming of car doors. Shit. I crouched in the bushes, which were in deep shadow, and started rubbing the damn rock. This time, the distorted vision appeared about 15 seconds after I started rubbing. I really rubbed that rock hard and fast. As my vision jumped back and forth from clear to fuzzy and from left eye to right eye, I could still hear the two bandits approaching. They seemed to be coming right at me. At the moment when it seemed like they were about to catch up with me, I heard someone say something very strange. Next chapter. I decided I wasn't going to let events affect me this time. No, it's not going to be like before. Do I see things more clearly now? I decided that my life would definitely be different this time. But I needed to be sure of a few things, and I needed to be sure of them now. The first morning after coming back, I hugged and kissed Chelsea with tears in my eyes from seeing my little girl again. Then I kissed Francine on the cheek, who was getting ready to go to work after the babysitter arrived. I walked into the office as usual and immediately tried to access the network and server. The first thing I had to do was to ask one of the IT guys to help me log in, as it had been several years and there was no way I could remember my network password. Once the password was recovered, I got down to the dirty business of backing up the evidence of Thompson's illegal and unethical business practices that I had started collecting years ago. That is, now. Naturally, there weren't as many files as before, but I was sure there were enough. During lunch, I picked up a DVD-R with individual copies of the electronic evidence against Thompson and reopened a new account at a different bank than the one Francine and I used. I bought a safe to store the evidence on the DVD-Rs. I transferred several $100s into the new account at that bank and began planning my campaign to achieve financial independence from Francine. But independence from Francine, simply by virtue of the situation I had driven myself into, meant that independence from J. Carter Thompson had to come first. Thus, I built up my small insurance portfolio against Thompson before doing anything else about my attempts to change the direction, and hopefully very much change the results, of my sham marriage and life. In another timeline, well, now timeline, I became quite adept at understanding how to multiply an investment many times over through the proper selection and timing of buying call options on volatile commodity-related stocks and earn many times more than conventional investments would have yielded. The risks were much higher than using common stocks or mutual funds in a conventional investment scheme, but the returns were also much higher, and they definitely should have been much higher for me, with my awareness of upcoming events and their impact on commodity prices. I just hadn't had the courage to do it before. Now, however, I felt much more confident that I could pull off this risky venture. And it was exciting when I thought about it. Just imagine, Louis no-risk Chandler now playing in the big leagues financially. So, the second thing I did that first morning of my comeback was to make a phone call and open an account with a new, young, energetic, and hungry broker at a local investment firm. After making sure he understood my intentions to invest in the commodities market, he and I came to an agreement on how much of an emergency fund I would need to establish with his company. During lunch, I went to my new broker's office and signed the appropriate paperwork to open an account. I confirmed the transfer of the appropriate amount to the emergency fund and met with his boss, who was salivating with anticipation of how he would get his share of all the money I intended to make with the help of his young employee. The third thing I did that day was to devise a plan regarding Alicia. Somehow, I needed to make sure that Alicia didn't die too soon in this life. Even if she still hated me because of my situation with her sister and how it came about, I still cared a lot about Alicia. Okay, I could admit that I still genuinely loved Alicia. I guess I still hoped that the two of us could have something. If only... First of all, Alicia had to learn about the threat her own body posed to her in the form of genetically determined cervical cancer. Also, since she was still a sophomore at Scott at this time, her family hadn't yet assigned her to marry Jerk Frank Deal. That wasn't supposed to happen until her senior year. I had to make sure Alicia wasn't doomed to abuse, even if she and I couldn't work anything out. Either way, I couldn't sit back and let misfortune descend on Alicia, the only girl I now realized I truly loved in my life. I had to try to do something. Next chapter. What the hell do you want, you little shit? I slumped down with my coffee right in front of Alicia, her books and laptop at a table on the patio of the student cafe on campus. I had roundaboutly checked her schedule the week before so I could catch her without the pressure of class and talk to her. Alicia, I began, I'm not here to fight with you. I have nothing to say to you, and I have no desire to be around you. So, she began to gather her things. If you're not going to leave, then I'll leave. Sit still and listen to me for a minute, I said in an annoyed tone and raised voice that I had never used before with anyone, much less this girl that I was still emotionally attached to. I need you to listen to me. This is literally a matter of life and death. Alicia paused and sat down, crossing her arms and nodding for me to continue, though there was a combination of skepticism and contempt in her gaze. Francine learned at one of her OB/GYN appointments that she may have a genetic predisposition to certain cancers, I told her. I had to lie a little that it had come from Francine, though I was sure Alicia wouldn't check my words with her sister. Alicia and Francine had practically written each other off after that horrible night when Alicia had caught her sister in bed with Alicia's alleged boyfriend. Me? I just wanted to pass this along to you so you can mention it to your primary care physician or gynecologist the next time you come in for an appointment. That's all there is to it. Could you do that for me? Why should I do anything for you, you son of a bitch? Alicia spat at me. You don't have to, I guess, I admitted, surprising her a little. But at least do it for yourself. I get the impression that almost everyone I meet doesn't want to die too soon. May I assume that applies to you as well? Alicia looked away from me but didn't say anything. Well, at least I tried. I'll go, I told her. Just always remember that despite what happened with your sister and everything else, I still love you. Alicia didn't respond to my comment with anything more than a look. But as I got up to leave, I thought some of the stiffness was gone from that look. Next chapter. It was several weeks after my comeback before I got to the fourth item on my list. I guess it was a combination of 4 A's and 4 B's, since it was about the same appointment I'd made right after I'd contacted Alicia about the cancer screening. I had hired a private investigator. Let me get this straight, Leon Atwater, the private investigator, asked me. You want me to follow your wife and find out if she's cheating on you? And you want me to compile a dossier on this Dilla guy? Do you think she's cheating on you with him? No, I replied. I think she's cheating, but with someone else, a guy named Stedman Carstairs. I have other reasons for asking you to compile a dossier on Frank Deal. You do realize it's going to cost you a little, don't you? He asked, raising his eyebrows slightly. I understand, I replied. But it's important to me. Both investigations are important to me in the long run. Yes, I've been checking into Francine's activities, especially when she wasn't with me. Including when she was traveling on business trips, when she was out with the girls from work or doing other things I wasn't involved in. But I was also trying to get a clearer picture of Frank Deal. That way, maybe I could keep Alicia from getting attached to that asshole. I didn't want the woman I still loved, I don't mean my loving wife, to be married to an abusive bastard. Next chapter. It was only a few months before the private investigator received the reports, but I couldn't afford to pay for their time for the whole period. They only paid for the time they actually spent when they weren't waiting for developments with Carstairs and Deal. And the whole period involved a fair amount of waiting between events. Yes, as it turned out, Francine spent quite a bit of time in the company of Stedman Carstairs whenever he was in town. And in the last 6 weeks he had been in town no less than 3 times. And on those occasions when he was here, he was obviously spending intimate time with Francine. On those nights when the babysitter left, I stayed home and watched Chelsea. It was just pissing me off. Of course, Francine and I basically just existed together as a married couple. Nevertheless, the Carstairs had no right to interfere with my marriage. After all, regardless of how I felt about Francine, I still had Chelsea. And I knew it was better for my daughter's well-being to grow up in a complete family, with a mom and a dad, and that was me, her real dad, regardless of who impregnated Francine with her. So I had to shut the stud Carstairs' mouth somehow. I was still haunted by memories of my other existence in which I had heard Francine call her lover that stupid nickname. The Bloodhound had very carefully vetted Carstairs as a correspondent in the affair with Francine. After all, Leon Atwater was demanding enough information from me to put together an evidentiary basis for a countersuit against my wife for adultery if she tried to divorce me. To do this, Leon needed to provide me with detailed information about the guy she was having fun with. After all, as part of the countersuit, I would probably sue the bastard for alienation of affection. In Leon's report, I read an account of how Stedman Carstairs started dating a girl from Wellesley College shortly after my marriage to Francine, when Carstairs was an MBA student at Harvard. He later married this girl after she got pregnant and was forced down the aisle by her Irish gangster father. I smiled, thinking about what Carstairs' wife's father would think about his son-in-law flirting with his daughter. "Hey, Leon," I said into the phone after I finished with the greetings. "Do you think you could send a copy of the report on Carstairs and my wife to the big man in Boston without him recognizing the source? I wouldn't want it to turn against me." "You know this guy has connections there, right?" Leon asked. "And if he gets that report, I'll feel sorry for that Carstairs guy when his father-in-law finds out about his, how shall I put it, extracurricular activities when he's on the road." "Yeah," I said with a smirk. "It would be awful if something bad happened to Carstairs because his wife's daddy wanted to beat the crap out of him, wouldn't it?" I paused, then said, "See to it, will you?" Leon grinned and told me to consider it done. I hung up the phone and decided that Stedman Carstairs was facing, at a minimum, a bad divorce and, at a maximum, a mighty ass-whipping. As for Frank Deal, I thanked Leon for his report and about that ass-wipe. It seems that Frank started showing himself even before he graduated from Georgia Southern University in Statesboro, just a year before. Frank Deal was arrested for cocaine possession, and his family pulled strings to keep him from getting a conviction in an adult criminal case. But it wasn't easy. He was also accused at least twice of swinging his fist at his then-girlfriend during frat parties where he got very drunk and there was only a one-time affair between them. I asked Leon to hold off on the message, as I knew it wouldn't have the desired effect of ruining J. Carter Thompson's plan to try to play matchmaker with Dill and Alicia until the next year or so. I hung up the phone and smiled, thinking to myself that things were working out just fine in this timeline. I touched the Nasib stone on my bracelet but didn't rub it. I felt much more determined in this incarnation of my life, and the feeling was very satisfying. I had already prepared myself to take Thompson out when I felt the need to do so, or when I felt threatened, or when I felt my family was in danger. I had evidence of my loving wife's infidelity, and I took steps, I hope I did, to eliminate the infiltration of at least one of her lovers, even if I knew of others at that moment or ever before. In addition, I tried to take care of the only woman in this world for whom I truly felt a sense of true love, Alicia. I warned her about her impending cancer, and I did everything I could to make sure she didn't end up married to an idiot fiancé. I was in that place of peace that future Mookie described to me in another life. Life was good. And then it wasn't. Next chapter. I was in Chattanooga when the call from Leon went out. I had been in a meeting all day and my cell phone was off. When I finally turned it on to check my messages, I found 6 missed calls from Leon. I was curious since our business with Leon was mostly in the process of being finalized. Why was he calling me now, and so many times in one day? Instead of checking my voicemail, I dialed Leon's number on my smartphone to talk to him directly. "Thank God. Lou, why aren't you turning your phone on?" Leon asked, clearly discouraged. "Well, Leon, I have a life, you know, and it includes my work. I'm in important meetings all day today," I replied, surprised that Leon was clearly agitated. "Okay, but there's something you need to know, and it might be urgent. You need to make sure you keep your wife away from that Carstairs guy for the next day or two," Leon said. "What do you mean?" I asked, suddenly alarmed. "I mean that bastard from South Boston got the report you asked me to send him," Leon said, as I walked over to my car and pressed the key fob to unlock it. But apparently, instead of finishing off Carstairs there in Boston, he sent 2 guys from his past life, if you know what I mean, to go after Carstairs in Atlanta and deal with him here. My guys in Boston say they're even taking the same plane as Carstairs today, and he should land in Atlanta around 5:30. Francine, Chelsea. If Stedman Carstairs went to my place, especially since I wasn't due back from Chattanooga until 2 days later, my wife and daughter could be in danger too, if those 2 Irish gangsters tried to deal with my wife's lover in our house. Shit. It was already 3:45. As I pulled out of the parking lot and headed for the I-75 freeway, I called my department head at Thompson Corporation on speakerphone. Apparently, it was too late for those still stuck in the office because the call went to voicemail and I left a message saying I had to go home for family reasons. I tried to call the condo to warn Francine, but either there was no cell signal on the way, or the call went to voicemail in the rare moments I was able to get through. It was already dark when I pulled into the perimeter on the north side of Atlanta near Galleria. Damn. Late afternoon traffic in Atlanta was as bad as usual, but it seemed so much worse now. I couldn't wait to get to my apartment and try to protect my family, albeit a dysfunctional one. I may not have been in love with Francine, but I still loved her the way any husband loves the woman who bore him a child, whom he raised as his own, and with whom he'd been intimate for almost 2 years. I didn't want her to get hurt, or worse, and I didn't want Chelsea to be in this situation. I didn't pull into the parking lot of my house until after 7:30. I was horrified to see an unfamiliar car already parked in my spot next to Francine's car. It was obviously a rental and probably used by Stedman Carstairs. It only took me 20 seconds to park my car in the spot reserved for my most douchey neighbor. Tough shit. I had better things to do. Instead of rushing into the house and warning the two crooks of what might be waiting for them, I pulled out my phone and made a call. Now I got 4 bars. If only she would answer instead of putting the phone on the answering machine. I know I should have been a little more brave now than I was in my previous life, but on the way back from Chattanooga, I decided that if they were doing this damn thing in my house, I just didn't want to see it. Knowing about it was one thing. Seeing it and having that image in your brain, especially when you're struggling to keep your family together until your kid is older, is quite another. "Hi, Lou," came Francine's quiet voice. It must have upset her that I was calling her when her stud was around, but she tried to remain calm. "What's wrong?" No honey or sweetheart, just what's up. God, what a mess this marriage had gotten to. "Francine," I said with a strength in my voice I'd never used in her presence. "Listen to me and don't argue." "Louis, don't talk to me like that," was all she managed to utter before I unleashed my full force on her. "Damn it, Frankie." I hadn't called her that in a long time because she hated it, and only let her father get away with it. "Shut the hell up and just listen for a change." When I heard her say quietly, "Okay, Lou, what got you so excited?" I told her, "You need to pick up Chelsea, get in the car, and go to your mom. Right now. Right now." I told her, "Louis, what are you talking about? I can't just walk out with Chelsea and drive to my mom's. I'll have to pack a diaper bag, a change of clothes for her, and—" "Francine!" I yelled at her to just shut up. Then I sighed and let the moment of truth catch up with both of us. There are two men who are probably coming to our apartment right now, and they have only bad intentions. Don't ask me how I know, just trust me. These are very bad men. I need you and Chelsea to leave, right now." "What do you mean, two men and come to our apartment? Louis, are you—" She didn't have time to finish before I hung up. "They're not coming to our apartment to see you or me," I said. Then I told her with all the ice in my voice I was capable of, "They're coming for Stedman." The pause lasted about 5 seconds and not a sound came from either end of the phone call. "What? Who? You mean Stedman Carstairs?" Stammering, Francine uttered. "But why? He lives in Boston. You know that, and—" "Damn it, Francine. Whatever you think, I'm not that stupid." I told her sharply. "Now get Chelsea and get your ass out of there before you get hurt as part of the collateral damage. I don't care what happens to that asshole, but I want my wife and daughter to be safe. Now get your ass in order. Do you hear me?" I thought I heard a sob, but it was probably just a gulp. Then I heard Francine, for the first time in our married life together, modestly reply, "Yes, Louis." Then she hung up. I didn't see fit to tell her I'd parked downstairs. It didn't matter. I just felt the need to be there and watch, I guess. And so I watched as my wife's ex-lover jumped out of the shadows of the building to his rental car and hurried away from there. I could breathe a little easier after that, but I didn't relax completely. After all, Francine and Chelsea still hadn't shown up. My God, why does it take so much time and effort to pack an infant or child somewhere? Another dark car pulled into the parking lot and parked in my spot, the spot that Stedman Carstairs had just vacated. Two large men got out of the car and looked around. My God, they were here. They must have lost contact with Carstairs in the hour-long traffic jam and just drove here, oriented by the information in the report. Francine, Chelsea, damn it. I hit the trunk open button, swung the door open, stood up hastily, and got out of the car. Running over to the open trunk, I looked inside and found a tire changer there. I then turned to where two men were standing in front of the car talking before entering my apartment. I threw the tire iron at the rear windshield of their rental car and watched as it hit with a big smack, leaving a massive star pattern on the broken glass. Maybe in the dark, they'll believe the Carstairs is their abuser and I can distract them from going to the condo with Francine and Chelsea. Given their mentality, that wouldn't be too hard to believe. Turning to where I was standing, I saw them pull their pistols out of their coat pockets. Standing is the key term, because I was just pulling out of the parking lot. Looking over my shoulder, I saw them give chase, following the sound of my footsteps when they couldn't see me through the landscaping around the condos. I turned to look ahead and just tried to keep running. After about 2 minutes of running down the sidewalk as they ran right behind me, I heard the squeal of tires and the roar of a car engine. Then, I saw Francine's Subaru whiz past me. At that moment, I was between the streetlights and I was sure she wouldn't have seen me even if she had been on guard. And I was sure in my terror that she wasn't on guard. I turned the corner onto a neighboring street and tried to take a shortcut through the next row of condominiums, looking for a place where I could hide so I wouldn't get shot or wounded by the two thugs chasing me. I stopped at a dumpster that caught my eye. Sliding the deadbolt shut with friction since the handle was on the outside, I lay down so I wouldn't move or make any noise. Wow, coffee grounds, eggshells, used cat litter, and carrot peels. What a wonderful combination of smells and textures. However, I was too busy trying to get my loud and heavy breathing under control to worry about the atmosphere of the restroom. Then I heard two guys moving among the dumpsters. I could hear them opening holes and moving toward me. They must have decided that the dumpsters were the only available hiding places and began methodically checking them out. Oh well, time to panic. The only way out for me was this damn rock. No. I meant this blessed rock, if it could get me out of this mess. I started rubbing the rock furiously, sparing no effort. Meanwhile, I heard two Irish bandits coming closer. Not now. Please don't let me die at the hands of someone who thinks I'm Stedman. Damn it. Carstairs. As dark as it was in that damn dumpster, I couldn't tell if the alternate dimming of my eyes was happening. It was just too damn dark. Then the sliding door closest to me opened and… Next chapter. Alicia threw herself into my arms and hugged me tightly, then kissed me with new tongues. Oh, sweetie, thank you. This trip means so much to me. And I just know that Daddy will listen and agree if you support me when I ask and if you talk to him on my behalf. My true love told me as I hugged her. Are you okay, sweetheart? Your eyes look like they've widened. I looked back at Alicia, and she slowly appeared in front of me. After taking a few seconds to come to my senses, I leaned over and kissed her again. Looking around, I saw that she and I were in my office in the company of her father. She was rarely there, not wanting to flaunt her relationship with me in front of her father at the beginning of our relationship. Now it was clear when it happened. It was a little over a month and a half after the spring dance, her senior year of high school, where we finally bonded. The following week, her father warned me not to get serious with his youngest daughter. After all, he had plans for her. As I said, Alicia and I continued to date despite her father's warnings, deepening our relationship to signs of true love. And I didn't have an ounce of courage the last time I was in the presence of J. Carter Thompson, and I succumbed to that awesome personal presence in a conversation that was to take place in just a few minutes. It was an event related to Alicia's last request to allow her to work with a friend in Africa during June and part of July between graduating high school and starting college in the fall. Although I had promised Alicia that I would support her request, in that other existence I gave up and agreed with her father before the meeting was even over that it might not be in her best interest. It took almost 4 weeks of apologizing and pleading before she agreed to even go to lunch with me, let alone on a date. Thankfully, that date led to a healing process beginning in our relationship. It wasn't even halfway through the summer before we started to really like each other. That's enough. Let's cut to the chase. As we walked into her father's office together, J. Carter Thompson looked up and smiled at Alicia like a loving father. Then he frowned and looked at me like a loving father trying to protect his daughter from some lower life form. Well then, sweetheart, Thompson said, turned to Alicia again and smiled again. To what do I owe this visit to my dear daughter? Oh, Daddy, Alicia said affectionately. I know you said before that you didn't want me to travel all over hell and half of Africa, as you put it. But it's a very worthwhile trip. They really need volunteers. And the deadline for me to let Marcia know if I can go with her is approaching. And I really need to know if I can go or not. Please, Daddy. She said it with all the tenderness of a manipulative daughter addressing a loving father. Of course they all are, aren't they? Sweetie, J. Carter Thompson began, I just don't know. What if something happens to you there? You know Africa can be a dangerous place. Daddy, Alicia replied, I know you don't want anything to happen to me, but I don't want you to worry about it. I went online and checked both the CIA and State Department summaries on Kenya. Kenya is where we will be working with Doctors Without Borders, and the place where we will be is actually safer than an evening shopping in downtown Atlanta. Thompson was known as a tough negotiator, except for his daughters. In the case of both daughters, Francine and Alicia, he simply relented if pressed. He did the same this time as he had done the previous time. He shifted his horrified gaze to me and tried to make me look like the bad guy. What do you think of all this African nonsense, Chandler? He asked me, frowning. He was afraid I would side with Alicia, and he would have to cave into his daughter's influence. How surprised he was this time. In my opinion, a trip like this can only be seen as educational, informational, informative, and useful, in the sense of helping the organization she will be working for and for her personal development. How can Alicia not improve her outlook on life by taking advantage of this outstanding once-in-a-lifetime opportunity? Thompson looked at me in shock and anger. Alicia only looked at me with adoration. I say she should do it with all the zeal she's capable of. I finished, looking as relaxed as possible. And that was entirely possible, now that it was finally clear that I was capable of growing my own balls. Regardless of how this meeting would affect my career, I didn't doubt what I had just said. I meant what I said, and Alicia was too dear to me to deny her this opportunity, even though I would miss and worry about her terribly while she was gone. Alicia squealed with delight and hugged me, bouncing up and down beside me, making me rise and fall slightly with her movements. J. Carter Thompson didn't squeal with delight. He looked at me with a death stare until Alicia let go of me, then turned to hug him as well. Then he smiled at her and nodded, and by those signs she knew that her upcoming trip to Kenya was a done deal. After Alicia left, but not before kissing me until my fingers ached when no one saw us, I was called back into Thompson's office for the obligatory reprimand for daring to give him the wrong answer to his obviously rhetorical question in the presence of his daughter. This went on for about 5 minutes before he drove me out of there, warning me not to cross paths with him again. Next chapter. Isn't he gorgeous? Alicia asked me after returning from her trip to Kenya. I met Alicia as she stepped off the escalator leading up from the rail streetcar tunnel that took her from Concourse E at the far end of Hartsfield-Jackson International Airport in Atlanta. This is where all international flights arrived so that anyone arriving in Atlanta from overseas could clear customs. However, in the case of Alicia's flight, the passengers had already cleared customs at Dulles Airport in Washington, D.C. Despite the fact that Alicia had already been in transit for over 27 hours, she looked fine. Mrs. Thompson, Alicia's mother, was the first to hug Alicia as she walked up the escalator. Mrs. Thompson then watched with mild dismay at the public display of her daughter's affection for me, a lowly employee of her husband's business no less, as Alicia bestowed upon me a heartbreaking finger-ache nuclear kiss, complete with tongue. Alicia returned to the world from Jomo Kenyatta International Airport in Nairobi, Kenya, to Hartsfield-Jackson, Atlanta, via Zurich and then Dulles. The plane left Kenya at 11:25 p.m. last night and arrived in Atlanta the following evening, today at 6:43 p.m., after a trip that included a 3-1.5-hour stopover in Zurich and just over an hour in Washington, D.C. The flight was scheduled to depart from Kenya at 11:25 p.m. last night and arrive in Atlanta at 6:43 p.m. the following evening. The total travel time, not counting the initial trip to Kenyatta Airport on a very rickety diesel-smelling bus, was just over 26.5 hours. Despite her obvious fatigue, she looked and felt great in my arms. Presently, she pulled away and showed me her pendant. It was a single stone in a beautiful setting on a silver chain around her neck. It was given to me by a Kenyan woman who took refuge at MSF to escape mutilation. Alicia shuddered at the thought of what she had experienced there. She told me briefly that MSF, or Médecins Sans Frontières, the French term used as the official name of the organization we in the US call Doctors Without Borders, had provided refuge to many Kenyan women who were facing genital mutilation, a horrific practice that was, and sadly still is, very common among some tribes in Kenya. Alicia befriended one of those women who had taken refuge at MSF, and the woman gave Alicia a necklace with a stone the woman called a bahati. I shuddered at how similar this was to my own situation with the Nasib stone. I still wore in the bracelet on my left hand. Well, I said to Alicia, giving her one last quick kiss on the lips, you need to go home to your mom's house and get settled. After you get some time with the family, I looked at Mrs. Thompson and smiled, hoping to score some points with that comment, but no such luck. We can think about getting together for lunch or something soon. With eyes that Mrs. Thompson couldn't see, I slowly winked at Alicia. Alicia smirked and said, we'll just think about inviting you to join us for the weekend, sugar. Lunch is so, I don't know. It's probably not nice since we mean so much more to each other now. I just think you should come over and let me show you off to my family more formally. As my boyfriend. What do you think? I was shocked. This turned out to be a version of the 1 in 5 scenario that had led to my emotional and mutual demise in my other timeline. Would I be able to make the necessary adjustments this time to avert disaster? This time I felt brave enough to face it head on. Hell yes, I'm going to do it. And I'm going to fight for Alicia and our relationship with her, this time with all my might. And if I'm strong enough emotionally and careful enough, I can do it. All that's left to do is watch it happen. Next chapter. Yes. Francine played the friendly role all week until I showed up at the Thompson house for Alicia to announce that I was officially her boyfriend. This role was no different than it had been before. It indicated that Francine was getting ready for the big game. But this time, I was alerted to what Francine was up to, as well as my own newly formed stance of looking at things from a firm position of self-preservation and self-interest. This time, I wasn't going to take the wrong sister as a wife, the way Jacob took Leah in the Old Testament biblical story. Alicia was the sister I was going to spend the rest of my life with, not Francine. And I certainly wasn't going to be raising the illegitimate children of Stedman Carstairs in this life. I would still love my girls, but perhaps as a loving uncle, not as a daddy. I couldn't help it. I will always have a special place in my heart for dear, sweet memories of my daughters. Chelsea and Gracie were still special to me, even if in that other existence they were born to someone else, and in this existence they had yet to be born. Friday night I arrived at the Thompson house with a more thoughtful plan than the previous time. That time, I had let events drive me, but not this time. I triple-checked that I had packed everything I needed for the weekend, including feeling the Nasi B stone bracelet on my left wrist several times to make sure I still had it on me. I didn't believe I would need his services to regress to another quiet place, but I wanted to be prepared for anything. Alicia must have been watching me because she popped out of the house to greet me as I pulled my weekend suitcase out of the trunk. She rushed into my arms to hug and kiss me, not at all feminine, for a debutante from Stone Mountain's social elite. Alicia ushered me into the house and gave me just enough time to greet Mrs. Thompson before leading me upstairs. She set me up in the guest room and gave me a very sweet kiss within 5 minutes of my arrival at her house. I arrived a little early this time, as Mr. Thompson and Francine didn't arrive until the afternoon. Alicia's father simply shook my hand and acknowledged my presence without doing anything extra. Francine, just like that other time, started looking at me with blue eyes. I just smiled, not giving Francine any sign of encouragement, but remaining wary. The early evening passed as usual. We had dinner, followed by an important conversation that emphasized several points. Alicia was adamant that her family should have no doubt that she had chosen me as her boyfriend. Mr. Thompson had discouraged her from the idea, pointing out the inappropriateness of the role of a servant, and Alicia had to conform to society's expectations of a young lady in her position. This was what spurred her on. Mrs. Thompson intervened only occasionally, trying to walk the fine line of supporting her daughter as she became an adult, yet not backing down openly and completely from her husband's wishes. Francine simply gifted me with odd smiles and remained silent, except for the occasional request of, "Could you please pass the—" at mealtimes. My contribution to the conversation may have surprised Alicia's parents, but it didn't seem to affect Francine in any way. After all, I knew she had her own plans for the evening. After the family members had expressed their opinions, I took advantage of the slight lull and said, Mr. and Mrs. Thompson, I must inform you all that I have developed very strong feelings for Alicia. My girl frowned and pulled her chair closer to my left side as I continued. In fact, I'm pretty sure I'm very much in love with Alicia. And while I realize that we can't make any official commitment other than a boyfriend-girlfriend relationship until she finishes her high school season, I see no reason not to predict that we have a very good chance of spending the rest of our lives together. At these words, the Thompsons widened their eyes in surprise and noticed that Francine's strange smile was beginning to fade little by little. Mr. Thompson glanced at Francine, and they locked eyes for a few seconds in a kind of silent communication. Mrs. Thompson, though not thrilled by my words, broke the impasse by suggesting that they remove from the dining room for an after-dinner drink. Moreover, I noticed that she was holding back from what she wanted to say and what she really felt. Now I was more attentive. I watched Thompson nod to Francine as we all sat in the recreation room of the Thompsons' big house, and she nodded weakly in return. Francine, as before, began to emit a come-on vibe in my direction, as if she was trying to pick me up at the bar. Mr. Thompson, as before, stated that he needed to go to bed so he could be fresh for a round of golf in the morning. As he left the room, he threw Francine another deliberately hard look. Francine walked over to the sideboard and poured the others that damned aperitif. Since her body concealed her actions, I couldn't tell if she had added anything to my drink, but I was sure she had, judging by what had happened last time. Francine smiled oddly again and handed me my drink. I thanked her with a smile, brought the glass to my lips, and pretended to drink. As she turned to pass the other glasses to Alicia, sitting next to me, and her mother sitting across from me, I silently hoped that the drink I had just poured behind me and under me so that the chair would hide the spill wouldn't stain the carpet underneath too badly. Putting my hand around the small glass to hide the lack of liquid, I pretended to sip from it for the next few minutes. Remembering that the effects of whatever had been used on me earlier lasted about 15 minutes, I kept a close eye on the grandfather clock in the corner of the room before I began my performance. Wow, I said, placing my empty glass on the low table in the center of the chairs we were sitting in as we continued to discuss dinner, but without so much negativity from Mrs. Thompson anymore since her husband had gone upstairs. Francine watched in silence as events unfolded. Alicia was adamant that she and I should continue to stay the course. A couple times I simply agreed with Alicia, and then it began to dawn on me that I was losing mental clarity. I'm not feeling well. I think I need to go to bed, if you'll excuse me, I said to everyone here. Trying to portray the helplessness that characterized the previous occasion, I let Alicia and Francine help me up the stairs and into the guest room. By this time, I should have been completely unconscious, so I pretended that I was. Soon, one of the girls threw a blanket over me, and the footsteps and whispers died down in the doorway of the guest room. A switch clicked, and the room was plunged into almost total darkness, and then the door closed with a click. I was alone, at least for the moment. I cautiously opened my eyes and made sure I was alone, in the darkness of the guest room. Remembering the location, I jumped off the bed and found my pants, hence my phone. I was already a little nervous as I realized that the decisive moment was fast approaching and everything needed to be carefully thought out. When I activated the screen, the phone lit up, and it was nothing like the gloomy environment of a moment ago. I clicked on the messaging app icon and sent a quick note to Alicia's phone, praying that he was still around and she would hear the beep or vibration signifying an incoming message. Me. Are you awake? Alicia. Yes. Can you come into my room? Alicia. Please. I expected another message, but instead I heard the guest room door click open and it got a little brighter, as the nightlight from the bathroom across the hall highlighted the silhouette of a woman in my doorway. I tensed, expecting it to be Francine. Lou, came Alicia's whispered voice. Oh, thank God. Oh, honey, thank God it's you, I said quietly, pulling her to me as she found herself in my arms. Little Lou was starting to make his presence known. Baby, what's so important that you need me here and now? I could barely make out her features, but I got the impression that Alicia was smiling at me. I was still too nervous about the situation to react calmly. No, but I need you to trust me and follow some of my instructions. What are you talking about, Lou? Alicia asked. She was still very young and opinionated, so she just wasn't used to blindly following directions or agreeing to something without asking a bunch of questions and arguing until she was completely convinced of something. I tried to emphasize the urgency by asking a direct question. Do you trust me? Alicia frowned. I could tell by the glow of my phone screen, but I knew from her body's reaction and short sigh that she was going to say yes, at least for the moment. Okay, sweetheart. Yes, I trust you, but you're really starting to scare me. What do you want from me? Finally. Honey, I know this is all weird, but I need you to get in that closet over there and sit as quietly as possible. I felt her tense up, about to object or start asking another series of questions, so I continued. We don't have much time, so I really need you to trust me. You'll see, hopefully soon, what I think is going on tonight. Alicia didn't say anything, but if I were in her shoes, I'd believe my boyfriend had lost his mind. But, blessed be her heart, she moved closer, put her arms around me, and said, Louis Chandler, you must be the craziest boyfriend a girl could ever have. Then she sighed and said, but I love you enough to let you show me what you want me to see, even if it seems completely out of the ordinary. I led her over to the closet and opened the door. Before I let her enter, I moved along the wall, took one of the side chairs in the room and pulled it over to the closet. You'll have somewhere to sit down here, and you won't be too tired if things take longer than I expect. Are you sure about all this, Lou? Alicia asked, making another attempt to resist. Honey, trust me. Within a few minutes to a few hours, something will happen in this room that will probably surprise you more than you ever imagined. Alicia started to say something, but I continued. But it will also reveal to you the truth about what may have caused our eventual breakup after this weekend. Would you have wanted that to happen? No, honey, I don't want anything to break us up, and you know it, Alicia confirmed, giving me another brief hug. Then please trust me, sit here and keep quiet. When what I suspect will actually happen, I want you to keep quiet, no matter what. You'll need to see everything that happens to understand what's bothering me right now. Can I count on you to remain silent until I personally ask you to come out? I looked at her in the semi-darkness. My phone screen was off, so the lighting was very low. I felt her nod and then sit up as I closed the closet door behind her. The slatted openings in the top half of the door let in light if there were lamps burning in the closet. If there were lights on in the room, however, Alicia could partially see through the lattice, and she could hear what was going on, regardless of the lights. I went back to bed and pulled the covers up, beginning what I hoped would be a short wait. Needless to say, the inactivity in the house and the silence was a little eerie as I waited for what I knew was about to happen. After all, it had happened before, and all signs pointed to it happening just the same. But I was sure that this time the outcome would be very different. The silent wait had been going on for almost 40 minutes when I felt my phone vibrate. Not wanting the glow of the screen to give away who had entered the room, I ducked under the covers. 5 of the longest minutes of the night had passed since the last text message. The screen went out about 15 seconds after Alicia's last response, leaving us both in darkness and silence. The tension made my fingertips shake. Then I heard the knock of a knob, and the guest room door opened with a quiet click. I turned my head so I could see what was going on behind the door and not give away that I was awake and on alert. I expected Francine to walk in. What I didn't expect was for someone else to be with her. When they started talking softly, assuming that I had lost my mind and was under the influence of whatever was in the drink, I realized with horror who it was. I silently prayed that Alicia, despite her shock at sitting in the closet and watching what was happening, would remain silent for a little longer. Are you sure he's out? J. Carter Thompson asked his daughter. I thought I heard Alicia sigh behind the blinds concealing her, but perhaps it was my imagination, and in my heightened state of anxiety, I heard something that wasn't really there. Yeah, Francine replied, making them both giggle. We just need to get the timing right so that Alicia is the one to wake him up and catch us together after our night out. I pictured Francine picturing quotes in the air, but the room was too dark to judge it. Please, please, Alicia, stay where you are and be quiet a little longer, I prayed silently. Either Alicia heard me through the ESP or someone heard my prayers. You know it's not my first choice how to solve our little dilemma, Thompson said. I know, Francine replied in a half-whisper, but Stedman has been gone since he left for Cambridge over 2.5 months ago, and I'll be there soon. We have to settle this now. It took me a second to realize exactly what she'd said. Stedman Carstairs, having been out of the neighborhood for over 2 months now. Doing a quick count, remembering when Chelsea had been born at the other time, I realized that the dates somehow didn't add up. There was about a month's difference between them. So what was different this time? I didn't have time to think about it for more than a few seconds before they started talking again. Well, just remember to play adoring lover until you get married, and then loving wife until things work out for us, Frankie. And maybe eventually we can even get your sister involved with you and me, Thompson said. What does that mean? I thought. Don't worry, I'm not a bad actress, Francine replied. After all, I fooled everyone in his old business for months until you bought them out. Remember? Yeah, her father replied quietly and chuckled softly. I remember it well. Just be careful. That's all I'm asking, sweetheart, okay? Don't worry, Francine replied proudly. I will. And after I bring Lewis out, you and I can go back to being Frankie and her stud? What? Maybe I just imagined it, or maybe I said it out loud. But either way, it didn't matter, because I suddenly sat up abruptly in bed, throwing off the remnants of my shelter along with the blanket. Out of shock, I reacted without thinking and yelled at both of them. You're her stud! When the lights came on, blinding us for a while, I saw Francine's hand on the light switch. J. Carter Thompson stood there, stunned for a moment by my outburst. Lewis, Francine said confusedly, and stood still for a second, obviously trying to think of a way out of the predicament she had put herself and her father in. In that pause, my consciousness was seized by the true nature of the matter. Francine, although she was actually in love with Stedman Carstairs and wanted to be with him, had been forced to drag me into all this simply by circumstance. But worst of all, Thompson was even considering, in an attempt to expand his evil web, getting out after his other daughter Alicia, the love of my life. Just not in my lifetime. Get off me, Francine, I said with all the anger I was capable of. You're a bitch. How could you stoop so low? A panicked expression suddenly appeared on Francine's face. Both Francine and Thompson realized they were now screwed, but I knew that J. Carter Thompson, an influential figure in upper-middle-class business and society in the Atlanta area, would go on the offensive as soon as he had a moment to think. Alicia didn't give him that minute. You're a bitch. Alicia finally had had enough and leapt out of her hiding place in the closet, causing the door to crash into the wall with a loud bang. I couldn't imagine anyone in this house still sleeping with all that noise going on around them. And I was right. I saw Mrs. Thompson move to a seat in the hallway just outside the guest room. All the players were here now. Alicia continued her tirade. Did you really entertain my sister and get her pregnant? Tears rolled down her cheeks. What kind of monster are you anyway? As I climbed out of bed to stand next to Alicia and possibly keep her from being physically abused, I noticed two things. First, Mrs. Thompson was no longer in the doorway. Second, Alicia was wearing the pendant she had brought back from Kenya, the Bahati stone, as she called it. She held it in her hands and fiddled nervously with her fingers, venting her frustration and anger. And you, Alicia shouted at Francine, my own sister, are trying to separate me from the man I love and lure me into a loveless marriage. I moved closer and put my arm around her shoulders to let her know that I was there for her and could hold her if I needed to. The two gunshots we heard made us all jump. It felt like J. Carter Thompson had just flipped from one place to another. He was tossed around as if his legs were locked in place and his body was hinged. Francine stood next to her father's fallen body in shock, hands clasped to her mouth. Alicia was clutching the Bahati stone in her fingers with even more concern, and I raised my left hand to hold her when I felt her body begin to sag, whether from submission, shock, or just fatigue after the adrenaline had worn off. I only noticed out of the corner of my eye as Mrs. Thompson entered the room with her arm outstretched, in which she held something that looked like a revolver. Damn, she just shot her husband. My mind told me. I've had enough, you bastard, I heard Mrs. Thompson shout. Turning Alicia toward me, I saw the pupils of her eyes react in a way that was very familiar to me lately. The iris of the right eye was almost completely obliterated due to the dilated pupil, and the left eye became almost completely blue due to the small pupil. The two eyes then began to alternate in this form and manner. Hugging my only love tightly and feeling a sudden sense of foreboding, I started rubbing my own Nasib stone with the thumb of my right hand. I heard two sounds, one after the other. The first was Francine calling, "Mommy, no!" The second was Alicia asking me a question. Louis, what's going on with your eyes? Next chapter. My arms were still around Alicia, but the situation was different in a few ways. First, it was now the middle of the day, not deep night. Second, I was dressed in business casual clothes with a sports jacket rather than just boxers. And Alicia was wearing a very familiar pink chiffon cocktail dress with a high collar rather than just a nightgown. Third, we were no longer upstairs in the guest bedroom, but standing, arms around each other next to a very familiar potted plant near the hallway on the first floor. I touched my wrist. The bracelet with the Nasib stone was still in place. My heart jumped when I noticed that Alicia was still wearing the pendant with the Bahati stone. Yes, it had returned with her at the time and place we had been together. So this Alicia was most likely my Alicia, but I wasn't 100% sure of that yet. People crowded around us and chatted, sharing appetizers and cocktails. It was a party. But not just any party. It was the same party where Alicia and I had first met, and yet I could clearly hear her calling my name, as if she already knew me. I tried to clear my head and my vision, for I remembered well how Nasib's stone could affect one's vision for a few moments after it had done its work. Looking into Alicia's eyes, I saw that her pupils had begun to stabilize, much like mine had in the mirror when the phenomenon first happened to me. Alicia? I asked uncertainly, loosening what I thought was the girl's intimate embrace in my arms. Is that you? Or… I stopped, fearing that I had somehow lost touch with my Alicia, my love. Lou, Alicia replied. Of course it's me, sugar. Who else, silly? Then, as her vision cleared, I noticed in her eyes the beginnings of panic at what she was seeing and the memory of the horrors we'd experienced together in the other timeline just before we'd appeared here. Before she could say anything, I had to act. Don't say a word, I commanded her softly and firmly. I smiled at her, trying to reassure her. Just come with me to the patio and I'll explain these strange things to you. Alicia was still shaken by the strangeness of what was happening, but she clearly recognized me and trusted me. She nodded and followed me without a word as I took her hand and led her through the French doors to the patio. There, I motioned for her to take a seat and walked over to one of the bartenders to get her a Manhattan, only a little stronger, and me a KK and ginger. I felt the need to freshen up a bit and was sure it would help calm Alicia's nerves. And hell, booze was free at Thompson's party. And I asked her to hold the pendant with the Bahati stone in her hand while I talked to her. I quickly but calmly told her what power her pendant had. When she asked how I knew this, I showed her my bracelet with the Nasib stone and explained that it had been given to me with an explanation of its power, and that I had doubted the story I had been told as mere superstition until I needed to use it. I told Alicia that my stone had saved me more than once from difficult situations, and promised to tell her more about the situation we were now in as soon as we could get away from the crowd and her family to have a heart-to-heart talk. At that moment, Francine came out onto the terrace and headed towards us. Alicia, what do you think you're doing? Alicia's older sister threatened. Don't think I won't tell Daddy that you're getting even more drunk in public. Before Francine could say another word and Alicia could respond to her sister's anger, I intervened. I have one option for her, Francine. After all, she's 18, living in her own home and acting like a responsible adult so far. So what are you so excited about? Francine Thompson, this one, had clearly never faced such a challenge, and from one of Daddy's subordinates. Mr. Chandler, Francine said coldly, I would recommend that you pay your respects to my mother and father and leave the premises immediately. It all sounded familiar and quite reasonable. What happened next was quite different from what I remembered from the first time. Francine, I told her, snorting and shaking my head, I'll be happy to leave the premises, but when I do, Alicia will come with me. Francine and Alicia turned and looked at me in surprise. Francine was the first to react. You, sir, are sadly mistaken. My little sister is not going anywhere with the likes of you. Alicia turned to me and said, Lou, wait by the entrance, Shuga. I'm going upstairs to gather some things and then you can get me out of here. Francine came out of her surprised stupor, put a look of superiority on her face and said, Alicia, you have no right to… Alicia interrupted her. Listen, bitch, get out of my way, let me get my stuff and get out of here. Francine's face was completely devoid of color. She didn't say anything, but I could hear her trying to make some noises as Alicia tore toward the stairs. I walked over to Mrs. Thompson, who was just finishing up a conversation with an elderly couple who had just left. "Mrs. Thompson, you probably don't remember me, but I'm Lewis Chandler. I'm afraid I'm going to have to leave a little earlier than I had planned, but I want to thank you for welcoming me into your beautiful home." "Thank you, Mr. Chandler," the hostess replied with a genuine smile. I felt a little sad when I thought of the difficulties she was unknowingly facing at that moment. After all, I had already decided that I would not wait a moment in this world to become an instrument of reprisal against her husband by means of what I knew of his business and other practices. I was waiting under the porch when Alicia appeared from the side of the house. She had changed out of her holiday dress into pants and a sweater, appropriate for a mild Georgia winter day. She clearly wanted to avoid socializing with her parents by hurrying away. I smiled broadly and reached out to grab her bag. Bottom line, J. Carter Thompson had been sentenced to just 3 years in prison after the district attorney received an anonymous package containing a DVD-R with multiple incriminating records of his business dealings and launched a raid on the company with a team of auditors. But the short sentence turned into a life sentence for Thompson when he died during the authorities' armed response to a prison riot. He was simply in the wrong place at the wrong time and was shot and killed. Mrs. Thompson was scandalized by her husband's prosecution of her business dealings and a little saddened by his death. But it wasn't so much that she was upset by his death as that she was enraged by his actions during his lifetime when Alicia quietly informed her mother of her late father's inappropriate courtship of her sister Francine. By the time Francine finished therapy and began living at home with her mother, Stedman Carstairs had officially divorced his wife and returned to Decatur. Francine and Stedman, as it turned out, had really been attracted to each other for years, and when Francine and he finally married, the baby she was carrying this time was really his. While the feds were sorting out the details of transferring what was left of Thompson's company, I quietly started my own consulting firm to support myself and Alicia in our anticipated new life together. I also opened another brokerage account, trading high-risk but high-return options in conjunction with the commodities market. Needless to say, knowing what lay ahead of me, I settled in quite well financially. Mrs. Thompson and Alicia were saved from financial disaster by protected trusts. That way, Mrs. Thompson could continue to live in her own home, and Alicia could continue to plan for college. At Agnes Scott, of course. It pained me to wait a few years to marry my true love, but for the sake of allowing her to focus on her studies, we waited until my last year of college. I told Alicia the whole story of my various experiences in the alternate lives that the Nasib Stone had allowed me to live. The most useful information for Alicia, and indirectly for her mother and Francine, was the warning about their genetic predisposition to certain cancers, a genetic disease passed down the maternal line in families in this situation. Armed with this information and after receiving Alicia's medical reports about her genetic risks, Mrs. Thompson scheduled an immediate checkup, and her primary care physician confirmed the strange ovarian situation and referred her to a gynecologic oncologist, who removed a small mass that could become cancerous but had not yet reached a dangerous or threatening stage. Francine eventually decided to have a hysterectomy a few years later when she and Stedman already had 3 children, 2 girls and 1 boy. I couldn't help but ponder the similarities and differences between her 2 daughters with Stedman and Chelsea and Grace, whom she had fathered with me, well, with her father, in a past life. As for me, I learned 2 valuable lessons during all this weirdness. The first lesson was that I must stand up for the important things in life: love for my family, a desire to do right by people in both my personal life and business, and to maintain my self-respect with dignity by helping others do the same. And then there was another lesson. The next chapter. "Glenn, keep an eye on Stuart. Do you hear me?" Alicia shouted as we, the 3rd and 4th, rushed around the monument at the entrance to the cemetery plots proper at Fort Snelling. Yes, I was in Minneapolis again. We had traveled to Minnesota for one of my cousin's weddings, and I had convinced Alicia that I needed to pay my respects at my grandfather's burial site before we made the return trip to the sunny South. Thomas and Paul, our older children, stood around looking bored and barely paying attention to the younger ones. Yes, we had 4 boys. Given what we knew about the possibility of cancer in Alicia, she and I decided we needed to get busy making a baby as soon as possible after we got married. So, a few months after Alicia graduated from Scott High School and 10 months after our wedding, When she was still a senior in high school, Thomas was born. 15 months later, Paul joined us. It was another 2 years before we had Glenn, and another 2.5 years before we realized that daughters were likely lost to us since Stuart had popped out to marry. Eventually, Alicia waved the white flag and had a radical hysterectomy to eliminate any cancer-related problems, which we were now warned of and prepared for. We only slightly regretted not having a daughter, but the boys filled our lives with joy and adventure, keeping us busy and entertained. I know what you're thinking. What did we do with those two mystery stones? Well, Alicia's pendant with the Bahati stone is stored at the bottom of our safe, as is my bracelet with the Nasib stone. We decided that we were now in our shared peace place and would work together as a couple to keep the peace. Not that we didn't argue sometimes, of course we did, but we did it in a way that didn't burn bridges. And we showed our boys how a married couple can argue constructively without being very rude to each other. Of course, we did not show the boys how a married couple celebrates making up afterward. The way Alicia and I did it was too erotic. As we finished our visit to the cemetery and were walking back to our Suburban parked in one of the nearby parking lots, I noticed one of the cemetery workers. Something about his appearance triggered a memory. He was black, not just African American. He was truly African black. As we drove past him, he was driving a gasoline-powered alligator car. I noted that he could have been Somali, but not a Mookie. I grinned to myself, and when Alicia put her arm around my waist and asked what had amused me so much, I only gave a short snort. Nothing much, sweetie. I was just distracted by a memory for a moment. Alicia looked at me with her sweet smile and said, "Well, you just remember our motto when we start getting distracted by the unimportant things in life." I laughed quietly at her friendly admonition, as we had repeated this phrase to each other many times in our first decade together. This was the second lesson I'd mentioned earlier. Yes, I know, focus. Always keep your eyes open and focus on what's important in life. End. Thanks for watching. I hope you enjoyed it, so subscribe to my channel and watch the next video.